and now open to questions.
I guess I have a question about how do you pick the best sample size? I know you said you like to start with at least 20. Is there such a thing as too many?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I would make it sort of dependent on, yeah, it's all dependent on what you're trying to do with your study. So, and what limitations you might have. So, I don't know. The only time I felt like I have too many subjects is, if I have interviews and then I have to analyze all of those. And but at the same time, then you can, if you're trying to do something statistical, you're really limited if you have small numbers of subjects. And so more is pretty much better if you're doing a statistical study, if you're trying to do a comparison of any kind. And so the reason why I'm sort of at that, I'd like to get at least 20 for interviews, is more of like, that's sort of my bare minimum if I'm hoping to see any kind of significance or effect size. And often, sometimes I don't, and then I'm left wondering like, well, if I'd had a larger sample size, maybe I would have seen something.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're, and I think even if you're not doing statistics, let's say I'm just trying to understand, like I want to describe, who are the people who are coming to my, planetarium, or, I don't know, just like something descriptive. You may still want to have a fair number of people, because if you start getting, too few, then the details get, overwhelm of just a few people, the findings from their study. Now, the caveat on that is, if your study is with some very unique population that there aren't a lot of representatives of, then you might be able to get away with a smaller sample.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a very vague answer.
No, it makes sense. It all depends.
Yeah. I think people who are really heavily statistical could say, well, if like there's definitely ways that if you already know what the effect size that you expect, and you can do these calculations with statistics on how many subjects you actually need. And I don't know how to do that. That's not the kind of research I do.
Actually, I have a question that's related to that. It has to do with methods. And you mentioned like doing the assessment actually during the show is kind of ideal in that, and you mentioned clickers.
Yeah.
Because then, but building into the show would be a really elegant way to do it. But I was just wondering, and you can get more more data.
Yes.
That way, and if it's done right, especially with clickers, if you have them. But I was wondering if you have teachers, for school visits coming in, I know at Lawrence Hall of Science, we used to always dream or want, and we actually provide pre or post visit activities, but that could be cast as a pre questionnaire or a post something or other. Has that been done very much? And could you get a large N with that?
I think your limiting factor there, like it certainly as a design is certainly robust, right? Because, you could collect it, have the teachers collect it, it could be tied to your show in some way. As I was starting to say, the limiting factor is with IRB, you might have to have parental consent from all those children's parents. So you'd have to have gone through the process of getting the consent forms sent out to those parents. Now, maybe that would be a problem. Maybe they have to do consent forms to come to the field trip too. So they get the consent form to be part of the research and to go to the field trip. And then that wouldn't be a big deal. But that would just be where, you might not get as many because not all the parents would sign that consent form. Some IRBs allow you to do, but I don't know how often this happens. Sometimes you can do like a passive consent, which says you send out a form that says, unless you send me a letter saying you don't want to participate, I'm just going to collect your child's assessment. But not every IRB allows that to happen.
Yeah. I was wondering if that's kosher.
It's dependent. Yeah, it depends on what. Like some IRBs allow that, and some IRBs don't. And some school districts have their own IRB, and then they'd have to make a decision on that. It really helps if you're not going to actually collect and identifying details about the student. And so there's ways to get around collecting and identifying details, like if the teacher just writes a code on the student's pre-post in some way so you never find out their name, maybe that could be a way around it. Yeah. It's like you'd think, these things seem like they should be easy, but we also need to make sure parents have the right to whether, their child's going to be in a research study.
Yeah, actually, the anonymous approach probably is the easiest. Otherwise, rules can become a non-starter.
Yeah.
You want to start to go there.
And even with that anonymized, you have to go through an IRB because it's still human subjects, and they have to make the decision or help you make the decision on whether or not you have to collect active consent, or you can do this kind of passive consent from the parents. Yeah. There might be easier ways, like if you're doing it, you might be able to most easily do that possibly in like a planetarium where you're doing clickers, where you could maybe get permission because you're not collecting any identifying details from the people in the planetarium. So they get a clicker, they click at the beginning, they click in the middle, they click at the end, and there could be just a question where they say they participate. That one could be pretty easy.
That's my telephone.
I'm thinking about the research you used as an example.
Yeah.
And well, the challenge there is your subjects have all had lots of experience and success with learning traditionally, probably.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge, right? They've had 18 to 20 or well, I guess they're all 18 to 20-year-olds, and so they've had a lot of experience learning in traditional ways. Yeah. I
want to see that in middle school.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm thinking more about whether or not, because the embodied group did get to like act it all out there. We put up pictures of the constellations around the dome, and then they got to like, oh, okay, so it's where you are now, which constellation can you see and which one can't you because the sun's in the way, and they moved around and they did all that, but they never saw a visualization of what this would look like looking down from space. And so the other group got to see that visualization of what it looks like from space. They didn't get to do anything with it. They just watched it a couple of times.
Different perspective, though, huh?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yes. So, maybe that just was, there's something there that we need to explore more about. They had enough information and were able to pull it together with that visualization. Yeah.
I remember some of the research you've done before and presented where you had also questioned the students like weeks or a month or so later to see how much the retention was. I thought that was very interesting because it was pretty dramatic.
Yeah. We were really fortunate for that study where we were able to interview the kids before, immediately after, well, like about a week after, I think it was, and then a year later.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's because we were, this was all within a school district. So I was working with Kim Small in her planetarium, and so she, that one, I think that worked. I mean, that worked in some ways similar to what you were saying, Alan, where we had these classroom visits before and after the planetarium, and it worked because the planetarium itself was part of the school district. So you had a nice synergy between how you collect data, and then the kids were still in the school district a year later. So we just, hey, can we interview you again? And so we did. So, but I think for a lot of studies, that kind of year later follow up, it is really hard. But it was really interesting. We found, that in some of this, that they didn't go back to their pre-level. In some ways they didn't retain all of it, but they definitely we're at a level higher than where they started. So, which I think is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's an interesting question, right? So one thing you could potentially find is with this study that we did with comparing embodied and traditional, maybe on their immediate post, they were the same, but a month, 2, 3 later, maybe one of those has more lasting effect. Yeah.
And that's really an important thing. I mean, it's fine to remember something a week later or something, but you want it to be something that's going to stick. I mean, that's the whole point of it, right? So, that is a hard thing to test for. I can see why, but really useful. And I remember some of the stuff you showed. It was very dramatic. How interactive kinds of things, and planetarium, being in the planetarium was really helpful in the retention.
Yeah.
So when you're doing an interview, I can see that being great for figuring out how deep people's learning has gone. But how do you ensure that you're not biasing or leading the students to give you the answers that you expect?
Yeah, so we, we work as a team to come up with an interview protocol, and so we're not often strict on just asking the questions exactly on the protocol, because we also want it to be natural, and not rigid, so that especially when you're working with young students, you want them to be comfortable, and even college students, like, what are you doing? But at the same time, that should guide you to not go too far. And so if you start with that basic STEM, like I'm trying to think of what our interview questions were. Do we ever see, well, one of the things we do is we start with showing them a picture. It was actually a drawing of the constellations we'd see tonight, and say, would the constellations ever look different than this? Oh, and they'd say yes. And then we work on coming up with prompts that are not leading, like, tell me more. Oh, when would that be? And so things that are very vague but push them to say more.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's good as a team, if you've got a team, to do a couple of practice interviews and then share those interviews and see if anybody is doing leading versus just letting the participants tell you.
Okay.
I've heard myself in interviews start to lead, and sometimes you can become aware of it. You're like, I did it. And then you're like, I can't use that data.
I just want to recognize that a couple of people have come in very late here, and we're getting close to the end of the session, but I wanted to invite them. It's kind of hard without having seen most of this presentation. Were there questions that you had in general what that prompted you to come to this seminar. And feel free to speak up, because this is the question and answer period.
Frank Gear here in the UK. I was intrigued as to exactly what was going on here, and that's why I happened to log in right now. It's about 11:30 UK time at night, but saw that was there. Been a mobile planetarium for about 20 odd years now. So it was interesting to see what went on here, and I shall probably be joining one or two other seminars in due course. Thank you very much for allowing me in.
Yeah, that's great. I think it may be, it could be that we had a time zone error. The time that I posted, I tried to get the accurate universal time there for people who are coming from other places. Was this an hour off, or did you just come in late?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Were you expecting to be at the beginning of the seminar?
I didn't know what to expect, I must be honest.
Okay, it could have been a time zone error on my part.
Yeah.
Or somebody's part, yeah.
I am an amateur radio man, and I do keep clocks here with Eastern, Central and Pacific time zones. So I seldom have problems with timing.
Okay, just checking.
Thank you very much for linking in.
Yeah, well, for your information, this is going to be, this is recorded, and I'm going to post it on the YouTube channel for the Pacific Planetarium Association. So I'll announce when that actually is posted. It'll probably be in a couple days.
And Alan, all of the previous seminars are also available to be seen?
Yes, they are. They're all there. Presentations and question and answers. I guess I could mention that, and again, actually, I want to thank Julia for this is really a good seminar, and I want to make sure everybody unmutes and gives her a round of applause for this. Okay, so get that unmute button. And we didn't have a topic for next month, but I've been wanting to have a planetarium educators workshop based on some materials that we developed long ago, and that are probably still applicable. I think, John, do you know what I'm talking about?
I know the published printed thing. Is that what you're thinking of?
Yes, and I would invite you to help with that session as well. We can talk about that more offline if you're interested.
Right. Sure.
But it would be an interactive seminar, kind of along the lines of what Julia was doing, where we would really get participation from everybody who's here, who shows up. To have a real seminar that is where everybody's invited to participate and not just listen. Sort of like Julia just did with getting us involved in this presentation.
I thought it went well. I liked having people chime in.
Yeah, we may end up using the chat actually for part of that participation. And Frank, if you find the chat button on your screen, I've been asking people to kind of sign in just with your name and where you're from, if you're interested in doing that before we end. But we're not quite ended. Are there any more questions?
No, not for me. I shall keep my eyes open and come in when next you're on, see what goes on.
Now there's There's a person that has signed in as C. Leon 1187. Who?
Oh, well, that's me. Frank
Oh, that
Lee.
is you. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That's my email address on Yahoo.
Okay. So that's same person. Okay.
It also happens to be my full name is Cleon Gear, double barrel.
Yeah. A lot of times if somebody has trouble with their connection, they will call in on the phone and then log in on the computer to see what's going on. So that's why two people will show up at once.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, all, for allowing me to see what goes on.
Yeah, and we'll see you at the next seminar, hopefully.
All right.
And everybody. Okay, unless there's any more questions, we're about ready to sign off here. I'm going to stop the recording.